Yes?
So many of my clients are high school graduates and they don't have 30 years of experience.
Yeah, that's perfect. Again, as long as the CRA understands, that's again why I'm saying in the descriptions, talk about the technological variables. If you're doing plastics molding and the CRA sees you talking about rheology and viscosity and or the creep strengths, the metals or things like that, they'll say, well, that's kind of things that someone skilled in the art would talk about. If you're saying, I want to make this better, and you're talking in layman's terms, yeah, those issues are definitely going to pop up. Are you qualified to do work in this field? For sure. Quick illustration of the hourly rate. So you'd have your salary base plus the bonus, like we said, less your specified employee for your labor costs, plus benefits, the employer's portion, which is all part of your box 14. So the employer's portion of stuff all goes in. It's the employee portion that's only claimable when you do the traditional. Okay? Divided by the hours available for work. So this is where I'm saying, if you take a normal year, hey, 40-hour work week times 52 weeks, that's 2,080 hours a year. That's what the CRA might tell you to divide by. But the reality is I'm saying, well, no, you're only there 47 weeks, so you divide by 1880 instead of 2080. That just bumped my wages up by 10%, right?
So you do actually subtract the weeks that they're like about only.
Exactly. Hours available to work. Now the reality is, especially in owner-managers, this is where you get into some gray areas. The hours available to work, some of these guys work 3,000, 3,500 hours. And if you tell the CRA that, instead of saying, well, a normal full-time work year would be 1880, which is what we try to use, if you tell them 3,000, that's the number they're going to want to use for the denominator there. And if your time tracking system, a lot of guys will tell you, this guy worked 2,422 hours this year, and it's there. If you have that, that's generally the number that you want to use. Okay? My one exception on this is if I pay the owner's salary, or anyone's salary, you're supposed to work 40 hours a week, I pay you $100,000. And then they work overtime. I believe it's up to them on whether they want to do their SR&ED during their paid time or whether they want to do the non-SR&ED stuff after hours. Okay? So my position is, if it's salaried employee that's supposed to work 40, I would argue that if they're the head of R&D, I hired you to do R&D ed, that's all I'm expecting you to do, but you're a real keener, so you help with marketing and other stuff after hours, I shouldn't have to force you off the property. So even though you work those extra hours, I should still get 100% because that's what I paid you for. I shouldn't be penalized by you working extra time for free. So again, CRA doesn't agree with me. They're saying, no, if Ed worked 2,400, that's the number to use. And that's a gray area. There's no right or wrong on that. It really depends how you approach that with a CRA. Okay? So I talked about the limit. Yes?
What would you do the normal hour 1880 per hour? 1880 hours per year?
If you have a 40-hour week, under the example of 47 work weeks, yeah, 3 weeks vacation, 2 weeks stat holidays, that would be 1880. That would be the number I would typically use for the average. But it's really up to the client. Some guys have 35-hour weeks. Some guys' time systems will tell you the hours. That's the number. If they tell you exactly how many hours the guy worked, that's the number I would tend to use.
Talk about available hours for work. What if the engineer or the head of this shred part of your business goes on trade shows out of the country?
That gets into an interesting point. Let me revisit that in section M, foreign expenses. The quick answer is now you can spend up to 10% of your time doing things like that outside of the country without any negative effects. My position on that, and I've argued this since the early 90s, and they just came out with a 10% a few years ago, is that I think all of those costs should be eligible because when that individual files their personal tax return, they pay tax on every dollar. They don't say, hey, I was in Germany for 3 weeks, so don't take any tax off my paycheck. No way. Every dollar of their withholdings goes back to the CRA in Ottawa. I'm saying, and our science policy says we have to encourage these, Canada's a small country, we have to leverage knowledge from abroad. We have to encourage our research people to stay abreast. So all our policies are saying we should do this. I'm saying if you took the tax off the guy and they're doing SR&ED, it should be whether they're doing SR&ED that's work. Are they doing valid work or not, based on the scientific issues. You've got the money for the payment, you should pay the credits. Almost all CRA reviewers agree with me, all the senior ones. They say, no, we agree. The CRA tells us to do it a different way, but if you claim the proxy method and don't claim foreign travel expenses, I'm not going to ask. Don't put in your description that you did the test in Ohio. Just tell me what the test was and what you learned from a scientific perspective, And as long as it matches your T4, we'll let it go. Okay? And at the highest levels, I've asked people, like, why wouldn't you pay? It's not like you're not getting tax off the guy. If you weren't taxing the individual, I could completely understand. But you're double dipping. You're getting income tax and then arguing it's not a qualified expense. And again, most CRA reviewers, when you explain it that way, say, no, I completely agree. If the person paid their personal income tax on their wages and they really did legitimate SR&ED during that period, we will give you the credits. And that's just my position. You kind of have to know when to fight and when to run. Yes?
Dave, I just wanted to ask what criteria has to be met for a major shareholder whose background is not engineering, but is actively involved in SR&ED?
Well, like I say, the formal background's not as important. What they want to know is the understanding of the variables. Okay? And one of the other things that you'd want to look at is what kind of activities are they doing. So if you look at the page on F.5, if they're doing direct line of supervision or getting involved on the design of the long-term planning, things like that, and we go traditional overhead, those might be in. So the first question that we have is it directly engaged? Then it's in no matter what overhead allocation we use. So the direct research and first line of supervision. Arguably those people could be in the planning meetings, which is first line of supervision. And if they understand the technology variables, that tends to be the question. If they understand the technology variables being addressed, those costs would be in. If the reviewer talks to them and they're answering, often in software, look, I don't understand about the technology, these are the features that I want, they may feel you're not really involved in the technology, you're more involved on the business side of the process. So again, I would say it's the science that should drive the claim in each case. Whether you're a shareholder or not, it's less relevant than whether you really are integrated in the development, understanding the variables and giving input and feedback, or whether you're really just on the business side telling the developers what the end product or end features or objectives should be. So there's a quick example of limiting the 5 times YMPE. If we had $300,000 salary, 80% R&D, normally we'd say 80% times 300 is 240, but in this case, 231.5 would be 5 times YMPE as our cap, as a quick example. Okay, any questions on wages? That is probably the most important source of cost for most claimants. You get the odd ones who have no employees. Everyone's paid as a subcontractor, so that creates a whole set of real neat issues on how to allocate overheads and other things. But typically, if you can maximize the wages, the rest of the claim tends to go through very quickly because that's the least scrutinized by the CRA. They already have most of the information that they need to review it. They have the payroll remittances by employee. They have everything that they need to double check.